Hello everybody, welcome to the video. Hopefully you're all having amazing creative days. So today we're going to continue our comparison between the R5 Mark II and the R5. So in the previous video, right over there, we compared the color science and high ISO performance of both cameras. So if you want to check that out after this video, definitely check that out. In this video, we're going to check out the noise performance when lifting the shadows at different ISOs. So that's going to be the thing, which camera will perform better, which one is better at low light, and which one is better at, I guess, recovering details in images in dark shadows. So that's what this video is going to be all about. So if that's what you're into, definitely subscribe to the channel. We're going to be doing a lot of videos comparing these two cameras, photo shoots and all that kind of stuff. But with that being said, let's get into the video. All right, so quickly here, before we jump into analyzing photos from both these cameras, let's try and understand the differences in the sensors from these cameras. They're both 45 megapixel full frame sensors, but they are built differently. The R5, for example, has a regular CMOS sensor, where the R5 Mark II has a backside illuminated stacked sensor. So the R5 Mark II is built for speed, where the R5 is just a regular CMOS sensor. All right, let's take a look at the readout speeds from both these cameras. So the R5 has an electronic shutter readout speed of 16.39 milliseconds, which is really slow, and an electronic shutter readout speed of 3.5 milliseconds, which is decent. Now the R5 Mark II, on the other hand, has a faster electronic shutter at 6.3 milliseconds and a mechanical shutter at 3.4 milliseconds, which isn't really that much faster. So yeah, you're paying for this backside stacked illuminated sensor, and according to the research I got off of the internets, you're just getting 0.1 milliseconds faster shutter speed. All right, so now when it comes to bit depth, the R5 has 12-bit electronic shutter and 14-bit mechanical shutter. So if you're an R5 shooter, you definitely want to be shooting with mechanical shutter if you want to get the best dynamic range and best colors out of your camera, whereas the R5 Mark II has 14-bit depth in both electronic and mechanical shutter. And now for the unknown unknowns. So dual gain ISO. Does the R5 Mark II have a second gain for photos? So as we increase the ISO in the R5 Mark II, will they clean up at a certain ISO? I'm curious to see. Color shift at high ISO, we're going to take a look at that. Will the color shift towards green or pink or blue or yellow as we increase the ISO? Does the noise create some weird tint? We're going to take a look at that as well. And we're going to take a look at noise in lifted shadows. So we're going to purposefully have an area of an image that's underexposed, and then we're going to increase that by 2 stops in post, and we're going to see what kind of noise that creates and which camera has less noise or better noise or more usable noise. So we're going to analyze all that in the video. So let's set up the cameras and take some test shots. All right, so before we get into the photos and compare the results from both cameras, let's talk about the setup. So we're gonna have the cameras here on a tripod. We're gonna be using the 28-70 f2 lens. I'm going to try to keep it at f5.6, but it's pretty dark in here. The only light is coming in from the window, and it's a pretty overcast day, so it's not a lot of light. So the plan is we're gonna take our exposure reading here from the white box, and we're gonna focus here on the subject matter in the shade. I've hidden it behind a camera case, so it's blocked off with a black background, black case, so it's pretty shadowed, it's pretty dark. And you can see here we have a book with a black spine, a white spine, a yellow spine, and a red spine. So we got a bunch of different colors here, and we can check the exposure and the noise and all that on those books. Plus we have a color checker. Focus is probably going to be right there on the little plus sign on the color checker, and we're going to see if there's any color shifts as we bring up the ISO and the exposure. And then of course we have our Optimus Prime here too. So this is the subject matter, and it is in the shade. So this is the plan. This is the plan. So let's see. And to be perfectly honest, like as a photographer, you definitely want to get the correct exposure right out of camera. This is a pretty extreme situation. Like you would never try and focus on this or shoot this by exposing for that. So yeah, this is going to be a pretty extreme case here, but let's see what we can find. The R5 versus the R5 Mark II. Alright, so for sponsor of this video, it is my other YouTube channel. So if you're a content creator, creative of any type, and you have trouble falling asleep at night and you're looking for some soothing sounds of rain in an urban environment, check out my other channel, Urban Windows, where I have just rain and blackout screens, and I use it to relax and unwind and fall asleep at night. So if you're the type of person and your brain is running at 1,000,000 miles a second and you can't sleep, check out that channel. Maybe you'll find some videos or some sounds that will help you relax and unwind. All right, sample photos complete. Let's take a look. Let's analyze. Let's see this. I'm curious to see what they look like. I haven't seen them either, but this is right out of camera. This is what it looks like. Exposure was taken on the white box. Subject matter is here in the dark. And what I did was made sure sharpening is set to 0 because Lightroom likes to increase sharpening automatically, and exposure was set to +2. So this is what it's going to be like for all the photos. Exposure +2, everything else is right out of camera, and these were shot in aperture priority mode f4. Camera set the shutter speed to whatever it thought was best, and of course I increased the ISO as we went along. So let's take a look at these sample shots. All right, let's start off at ISO 200 and let's zoom in here and take a look. So right off the bat, colors look as expected. The R5 does have a slight reddish tone or red hue to everything. If you watch the previous video, you'll see that in the tests. But overall, I think it's okay. Looking at the noise here on the dark blue and this blue on the color checker, it does look like this is the R5 Mark II on the left, R5 on the right. It does look like the R5 Mark II has more prominent noise. All right, let's take a look at ISO 400, and oh, look at this. We have some shake here at 1/3 of a second, and it's probably the tripod. The tripod's not very steady, so got a little tripod shake in there. But in terms of the colors, it looks about the same. The R5 is definitely brighter than the R5 Mark II. And the R5 does look a little bit noisier here. If we look at the book spine, it could just be because the R5 is brighter overall than the R5 Mark II, but the R5 Mark II seems to be cleaner at ISO 400. All right, and moving on to ISO 800. Okay, and again, we're getting a little bit of shake here on the R5 shot, and this is so weird. Like, both cameras are set identically, but the R5 wants to shoot at 1/6 of a second f4 ISO 800, and the R5 Mark II is shooting 1/10 of a second f4 ISO 800. So I don't know why the R5 naturally wants to create brighter images. So take that for whatever it's worth. Okay, in terms of color shift, I'm not really noticing much outside of the ordinary. Like the R5, like I said, is a little bit redder overall, but nothing is looking strange. In terms of noise, the R5 Mark II is noisier, and you know, there was some talk about a dual gain ISO thing happening on the R5 Mark II at ISO 800, and I am not seeing it at all. I mean, the R5 has a little bit of shake to it, so maybe, okay, it's not gonna look as sharp, but the noise shouldn't be affected. Okay, let's go to the next one. ISO 10,000 +2 exposure. And again, the exposures are different. 1/8 of a second on the R5, 1/13 on the R5 Mark II. Let's see here. Color shifts, I don't see much color shift. You can see like the reddish tones here in the book spine compared to the R5 Mark II. The R5 is slightly reddish. In terms of anything crazy in terms of difference, I'm not seeing it yet. Although the noise on the R5 Mark II seems to be more pronounced. It seems to look more sharpened. Maybe that's because it's a sharper photo. And they're both shot with mechanical shutters, so they both have a clank shutter thing happening. Maybe the shutter's more aggressive on the R5 Mark II, that's why it's slightly blurrier. I don't know, but yeah, in terms of noise performance, it doesn't look much difference. The R5 Mark II is slightly noisier, but not by much. All right, ISO 1600 exposure +2. Not seeing much of a difference here. Again, in fact, they look pretty similar. The noise on both sides looks pretty much identical. It's grainy and kind of sharpened-y looking, but neither camera is standing out over the other right now, except for the fact that the R5 Mark II is slightly darker. But yeah, the noise looks identical at 1600. You know what, just out of curiosity, let's bump up the exposure to +4. All right, +4 exposure at ISO 1600, and to be honest, let's see, what are we looking at here? The noise level looks the same on both. I'm not seeing much of a difference. There is some red blotchiness happening on both these images. Hopefully you can see that in the YouTube video with YouTube compression and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm seeing some blotchiness, but in terms of one camera outpacing the other in terms of noise, not seeing it yet. And ISO 2000, let's see what we got going on here. Same kind of story. R5 is slightly brighter than the R5 Mark II. Noise looks about the same. Like, I'm looking at the dark blue, that seems to be the noisiest, and then the light blue here, but not much difference in terms of noise performance. The black book spine here looks about the same. I'm not seeing any color shifts outside of the ordinary. All right, ISO 3200, let's take a look. +2 exposure. The noise looks identical. I'm not seeing any kind of grain difference. One camera does not look any better than the other. Color shift, nothing outside of the ordinary. Everything looks good. All right, ISO 6400. Okay, so looking here, I can see some red blotchiness starting to happen here on the R5 Mark II. I see it also in the R5, but much less pronounced. Let's zoom in. Oh, okay, now we're seeing something interesting. Are you starting to see these patterns here? Can you see this on YouTube with the compression? There's these lines, vertical lines happening here. I'm seeing red blotchiness on both of these, but in terms of color shift, it looks like the R5 here shifted towards green slightly, and then there's like these blue blotches and red blotches happening here, and on the R5 Mark II it just seems to be red blotches. If we come down here, yeah, you can see this book spine is starting to look like reddish and it's starting to look greenish on the R5. So interesting. So 6400 is where things start to take a little turn here. Okay, let's check the next ISO. All right, ISO 8000, and again I'm starting to see more blotches here on the R5 Mark II, red blotches, and it's blotchy here on the R5, but not quite as, they're smaller blotches. Let's zoom in here. Okay, in terms of that pattern, we're definitely seeing that stripy or hatchy pattern. It looks like a weave or something. It's more pronounced on the R5 Mark II than the R5. In terms of the amount of noise, it looks like it's identical on both cameras. They're both pretty noisy here. Neither one stands out as noisier than the other. Color shift seems to be, well, it looks to be that they look to be both in the same kind of ballpark. Neither one is more green or red than the other. So at ISO 8000, they seem to be pretty even. Okay. ISO 12800 +2 exposure, and right now I'm starting to see a green shift happening here on the R5 and not so much of a shift. The colors look okay here on the R5 Mark II. All right, let's zoom into 100%, and that weird banding, weaving kind of pattern in the background is pretty pronounced on both cameras. Oh, look at this. Look at this. This red square here is bleeding over into the blacks. You see that? And on the R5 Mark II, the red is bleeding out everywhere. The blue's bleeding out too. The pink, not so much. This blue, light blue, is bleeding out. The green is bleeding out. Oh my God, I've never noticed this before. Yeah, wow. These colors are just bleeding out everywhere. That's not good. Okay, well, learned something new for myself here. Yeah, it seems to be green shift on the R5, and the colors seem to be okay on the R5 Mark II, except for this bleeding stuff. That red blotchy, green blotchy thing is still happening in the background. But overall, I would say the R5 Mark II has more accurate colors than the R5 at this ISO. But these bleeding colors, like, this is just brutal. Look at this red. Oh my God, let me see if I can zoom in here. Now we're at 200%, and you can really see the red bleed here, and you can see the red on the R5 is a little more orangey. But yeah, those colors are really bleeding. Holy cow! All right, so 12,800 is a mess. ISO 1600, and you can see the green shift on the R5 is pretty pronounced. Colors look more accurate on the R5 Mark II. Let's zoom in and see this disaster. Oh my God, look at the texture in the face here on the Optimus Prime. It is gone. You can barely see it. That pattern is still there, although it looks kind of more bluish on the R5 Mark II and reddish on the R5. Oh, and these color bleeds on the reds and the blues are absolutely awful. This is terrible. Like, I don't know if you know this, but you can actually go into your R5 and R5 Mark II menu settings, and you can block off the ISO from going past 1600 or 12,800 in your settings. So if you're shooting the camera in automatic mode, where the camera automatically picks the ISO, you can prevent the camera from reaching these crazy ISOs and getting this strange effect. Okay, yeah, color shifts we talked about, color bleeds, very strange that that's happening. In terms of the quality of the noise, it's identical on both cameras. Maybe the R5 Mark II might be a little noisier, but yeah, not much difference in terms of noise performance. I'm wondering if we bring down, if I'm going to introduce some noise reduction just to see what it looks like. And noise reduction slider in Lightroom has been set to 50 out of 100. So even with noise reduction, it doesn't help much. That color bleed is awful. The sharpness is awful. Like, everything just looks terrible here at 16,000 ISO zoomed into 100% plus 2 exposure. Okay, so should we keep going? I mean, this looks like a picture right out of X-Files or something. It's so blurry. All right, so yeah, let's keep going. All right, are you ready for it? 25,600. Oh my God, what a disaster. Look at the reds are bleeding everywhere, noise all over the place. It's interesting though, like even in the last set too, like the noise grain looks about the same, but the noise on the R5 Mark II seems to be lighter. It seems to be like a white noise, whereas on the R5 it seems to be like a mid-gray kind of noise, so it looks darker overall. But yeah, I would say at this ISO, both cameras pretty much unusable unless you have some sort of software which denoises everything. But that color bleed is awful. Even if you have a software that denoises, I doubt it's going to get rid of that weird color bleed. And that's happening on both cameras. Seems to be worse on the R5 Mark II. Okay, ISO 40,000. Let's see the damage here. Okay, before we even zoom in, I'm seeing all sorts of weird lines here. Are you seeing them as well? On both the R5 and R5 Mark II, there are all sorts of weird banding lines. And if we zoom in, yeah, you can kind of see this squarish pattern, this weave pattern. Like, the Optimus Prime face is completely gone. Colors completely gone. ISO awful. Color bleed everywhere. I'm even seeing this yellow bleed into the white book. This yellow spine bleed into the white spine. Yeah, but in terms of like performance, is one camera outperforming the other? I don't think so. I mean, the R5 Mark II has the lighter colored grain. R5 has darker colored grain. But they're still pretty both unusable. I wouldn't really say one is better than the other. All right, and last stop on this disaster here, 51,200. And all right off the bat, I'm seeing green and red blotches here on the R5. R5 Mark II has red and green blotches, and we can see that weave pattern here in the background. So this is the maximum ISO of both cameras, and why anyone would want to shoot here is beyond me. This is just absolutely unusable for both cameras. Color bleed everywhere, no sharpness, everything but the most contrasty things are completely obscured. But in terms of noise performance, I can't say one camera outperforms the other. The R5's noise is darker than the R5 Mark II, but overall, it's terrible. But yeah, let's bump up the exposure to 4 and let's see what this looks like. All right, so now we're looking at both these images at max ISO with exposure set to +4, and it just looks like newspaper print or something. This is terrible. Okay, this is nothing really to learn here. Let's take the exposure to 0 and see what it looks like. All right, now exposure has been set to 0. This is it right out of camera. And what are we looking at here? So obviously it's dark, it's noisy, it's grainy. You know, the exposure was set over here. Again, the R5 is lighter than the R5 Mark II. You can see some color bleed, but obviously if you don't bring up the exposure, it's harder to see. Oh, well, here you can definitely see it. The yellow book is bleeding into the white book on both cameras. There's that weird pattern happening, that weave pattern, although it's more pronounced in the R5 Mark II, but still pretty bad in both cameras. Okay, looking up here in the top right corner where there's the most light, you can see that the grain and the noise is about the same. I can't really say definitively one camera outperforms the other camera in terms of better noise and better, what's the word I'm looking for, lifting the shadows in the darks. One camera is the same as the other camera, the R5 and the R5 Mark II. I'm not seeing much of a difference. So if you're concerned about that, I don't think it's much of a concern. Neither camera performs really well in low light, especially with a large 45 megapixel sensor. All right, so we just finished looking at the images, and what did we learn? What did we learn from all this? Well, I mean, the R5 and R5 Mark II, in terms of the quality of the noise, they're both pretty much the same. Neither camera really jumped out at me as having better noise or less noise, although the R5 Mark II seemed to have lighter noise, which was a little bit strange. But yeah, for both cameras, I wouldn't shoot them above 12,800. Anything beyond that, and it's too noisy. It's just a little too weird. Yeah, so the faster sensor on the R5 Mark II, does it make more noise? Not really. They both have that weird kind of hash pattern. They both have weird color bleeds. They both have color shifts at certain points. In fact, the R5 seems to look better at higher ISOs while it shifts towards green and more neutral, whereas the R5 Mark II shifts towards like a reddish tone at higher ISOs. But again, color shifts can all be corrected in post, so not necessarily a huge deal. So here's the thing. In electronic shutter, the R5 Mark II is faster than the R5, right? But as we talked about earlier, if you go to a mechanical shutter, they're both identical. So if you're shooting birds, sports, whatever the case may be, if you can get away with shooting mechanical shutter, shoot mechanical shutter. It's faster than electronic shutter, even on the R5 Mark II. So what are you really paying for with the R5 Mark II? Why is it so much more expensive? What is the thing that makes it so much better than the R5? And we're going to talk about this in a future video, but in my experience so far, it's the autofocus. The big difference between the R5 and R5 Mark II, well, the only real difference, I think, other than price, is the autofocus. The R5 has a single chip that does all the processing, whereas the R5 Mark II has the single chip for the processing, and it has a dedicated chip specifically for autofocus and predictive autofocus. So it has like a basketball mode, a volleyball mode, soccer mode. So it tracks the ball and then tracks the player with the ball and then tracks the eyes on that player with the ball. So it just has a way more advanced autofocus system. So if you're shooting fast action sports or, you know, fast moving birds like hummingbirds, maybe the R5 Mark II would be better for you. But for 98% of the people out there, the R5 is just as good as the R5 Mark II, in my personal opinion, after using both of them. And yeah. And if you disagree with me, definitely let me know in the comments down below, or if you want to thank me for making this video, leave a comment down below. YouTube really values interactions, and that really helps grow the channel. So even if you want to tell me the weather in your part of the world, let me know in the comments down below. All right, so that's it for this video. If you want me to test something else with these two cameras, let me know also in the comments down below, and I will put that in a future video. So yeah, let's continue testing the R5 and R5 Mark II and figuring out exactly what the differences are. And I don't think there's much difference. Like I said, the autofocus is pretty much the only thing. All right, peace out. See you guys in the next video.